It's a fact that there's a developer who now who has land that she's ready to develop right next to Pleasure House Point, and there are now water views following the clear cut of the forest. And that was a question that I specifically asked of my city councilman, who took a campaign contribution from that company, and he didn't want to talk about it. That's another video that I can send along to you, a very defensive reaction to a question posed by a civic leader. Do I believe that our government has our best interest in mind? Absolutely not. What exactly happened at Pleasure House Point? I think we need more media coverage to kind of dig into it and to get answers. I don't have those answers, but if do I think this was altruism and something $12 million of our tax money to destroy our land in the name of water restoration and water quality? Hell no. Do you mind telling us about Pleasure House Point? You've probably seen the WHRO news piece, kind of the elephant in the room. Your developer donor has water views. Are you denying that?
I'm not. I mean, I'm happy to talk to you about Pleasure House Point anytime, but not while you're pointing the phone at me.
But I'm also a citizen journalist.
Yeah,
So you're not answering the question.
appreciate you.
Welcome to Truth and Reckoning, a broadcast from CELDF. In this show, we'll learn from frontline organizers and communities fighting against environmental destruction. We'll explore different perspectives and innovative strategies for movement building, the potency and the potential of rights of nature, and effective action in defense of our communities. And we'll share inspiring stories of people working towards right relationship with the land and each other. I am your host, Max Wilbert. Welcome back to Truth and Reckoning, everyone. Today we are revisiting an early show. In fact, the first or second podcast that we did, which was an interview with Dr. John Aguiar, who's in the Virginia Beach area in Virginia. We spoke with him. When was that, Tish? It was over 6 months ago now, something like that.
Oh, yeah, at least I think it was last spring.
Last spring, about a project in Virginia Beach where the city was planning to destroy an area of forest that was critical habitat for the terrapin, a species of turtle that lives in brackish water estuaries in this type of area like Virginia Beach. So since we spoke to John, that forest, at least part of it, has been destroyed, unfortunately. But we've also seen a flourishing of resistance to that destruction, a push by the community for the city to halt future destruction along these lines and to restore what they did. So today's show is a follow-up on the situation in Virginia Beach. And Tish, you conducted these interviews. Can you tell us a little bit about who you spoke with and what the situation is now?
Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting. We were just starting the podcast Truth and Reckoning back then, and John had reached out wanting to protect this forest area and especially was worried about that Diamondback Terrapin, which again is why we did the interview with him. And at that time he felt it was just him. But he still wanted to speak out. We did the podcast. And what's interesting is then we found out other things happened and were happening there after the fact, even though he thought he was just alone. So the follow-up interview is with 3 other residents. John is also, he's a 4th resident that we spoke with on the update, but the other 3 shared what they've been doing since, John came forward and kind of brought this to attention and more people heard it. There are also 3 residents of Virginia Beach area, Wendy, Kim, and Walt. some of the things they told me is really interesting. I mean, one, they filed a pro se lawsuit, so they actually signed on. Pro se means that you don't have lawyers representing you. You are doing it yourself. And so even though they reached out to several environmental groups in the area who claim to care about the terrapin, I mean, what's funny is the terrapin is also, I think, the state, like one of the state symbols for Virginia. And yet none of them, wanted to take this on. So they decided to go ahead and file it anyway. We did provide a bit of legal consultation to them on some things there. Terry Lodge, our lawyer, he did have a call and gave some advice there, even though we're not licensed to practice there. But so they did file that. They also have found other residents. One resident there did a documentary, which we'll link with, the other information. There's a lot more visuals now.
That's their construction entrance. Those trees there are coming down. Everything you're looking at.
Another resident offered a drone and had drone footage so you could actually see what happened. I'll let them tell their story, but there was just some really interesting things that stuck out to me. The city got pretty upset by some of the things. They had organized some protests, and the city put up a fence. This is after they cut down the forest, and they put up surveillance cameras that actually talk to people and threaten them if they step over like the line into the area that has been demolished. Saying, that they're on property, they don't have the right to be there and to get off.
Need to leave now or police will be dispatched.
So it's just kind of interesting, some of the, what we see. And for us, it's normal. Like we see this in a lot of communities, right? Where it just takes a few people standing up, making the rest of the community aware, because that's the problem. A lot of times the rest of the community has no idea. And so tying this to our idea of resistance and resilience and what does that look like? It looks different in every area. And just the value of speaking out about something, not thinking that you need some big organization doing it or you need to file with big lawyers in a courtroom. I mean, sure, but that's what we're taught to think we have to do. But speaking to our community instead of just the electeds and the agencies and all that can have a big impact. And so for me, that's the value of our first podcast and John being brave enough to come forward and then following up with the rest of these residents to see they're still moving forward. And one of the things I learned is that even though they cut down several acres, they're worried that they're going to cut down the rest of it. Right now, it's still standing, but they're worried. So there's still work to be done there, and hopefully that doesn't happen.
Yeah, it's gratifying to hear that conversation that you had with John. I put that podcast together and we put that out, like you said, last spring, that triggered a lot of this resistance, that even for people who are already somewhat aware of what was happening, it gave them the knowledge that they needed and motivated them to get out there and start fighting this project. And so, and it informed a lot of people who didn't know, had no idea that this was going on. And so I'm always struck by these sort of ripple effects that can happen from the conversations. Like the work that we do matters. And I want listeners and folks who are supporting CELDF and involved in their own work to understand that. Another example of that I don't share very often is that I did an interview with my friend Joshua Wright, who's a forest protector, advocate for forests. He works in the legacy forest defense world in Washington State these days, which we've talked about on Truth and Reckoning on our Substack. And I interviewed Joshua, I believe it was in 2019 or 2020. And at the end of that conversation, once we turned off the recording, he told me about a watershed on Vancouver Island in Canada that was threatened by a clear-cut logging project in untouched, pristine old growth grove. And he asked if I knew anyone in the area, and I connected him with some people, activists, longtime forest defenders living on Vancouver Island. And they were the first people that went out and started the Fairy Creek Forest Defense Movement that became the largest act of civil disobedience in Canadian history. So this little side conversation that we had after recording a podcast triggered a massive political movement that is continuing even now. We recently did our interview with Elder Bill Jones and Will O'Connell up there in the Walbrand defending these forests. And it's a meaningful story to me. And I don't share it often because I don't want to somehow claim responsibility for what happened at Fairy Creek. But it's these small little actions, these small little connections that sometimes seem so innocuous and oftentimes won't play out into something big happening and some great outcome coming out of it. But sometimes they do. And if we don't do these things, if we don't stand up and fight and say this is worth our time and our effort every single time, then we'll miss those opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And I wonder sometimes how many people, because we're so indoctrinated all the time, right? And here, because everything is about big, huge, in this country. And it's like, how many of these people, we defeat ourselves, right? We say things like, oh, it's not going to matter. It's not going to make an impact. And how many people actually don't, and that we're missing those opportunities. Who knows where we could be if they did. So yeah, if nothing else, I hope people get that lesson out of this, that yes, please talk about this, speak up wherever, and speak to your community members, because if they don't know, they can't act. I get so tired of hearing that people are just apathetic. It's like, it may not be that. I mean, of course, some are, but it may not be that. It may be that they really genuinely don't know because the media is not putting it out. Whatever they're being exposed to, they haven't seen it. So yeah, speak up, speak out, and it is a form of resistance.
Absolutely. And these stories like what we're talking about on this show, this forest destruction in Virginia Beach, this type of story is happening everywhere. It's happening in my neighborhood, in my community here in Oregon, in Western Oregon. I know it's happening near you, Tish, whether it's logging, housing developments, oil and gas developments, mining, new infrastructure, power lines, AI data centers. All of these types of destructive projects, they're metastasizing around the world right now. And some of them are these big, giant, dramatic projects that become flashpoints, like Dakota Access Pipeline. But often it's these small projects, like what we're talking about here in Virginia Beach, that just happen one after another, right? Hundreds of them, thousands of them, millions of them around the world that really make up the slow march of the destruction of our planet. And so, we need to fight that bit by bit. And we need to understand that people call for compromise and say, be reasonable. Okay, maybe we'll only destroy half of what we originally planned to do. But if we only destroy half this time and then half next time, then we've got a quarter left. And then we destroy half again and we've got an eighth, and then half again and we've got a 16th of what there originally was. That's the direction that's the trajectory we've been on for quite some time. And so I applaud Dr. Aguiar, John, Kim, Wendy, Walt, these people who are standing up and doing something, who are getting off their butts and making something happen. I have a lot of respect for people like that, and I'm excited to bring you this conversation with them.
Yeah, I do too. I applaud their efforts. And again, the idea that it also serves the purpose that, like what you just said, that people in their communities, when they're fighting a different battle against it, that it shows them they're not alone. That's the other thing, because we always feel like I hear that so many times too, talking to communities, that, well, our community's different. It's like, no, the system operates the same in all the communities. And that's why it's important you're not alone. I mean, and you're not up against this. It's not unique to your community. Your community is unique, but what the system's doing to it isn't unique. About a year ago, I had a conversation. It was actually our second episode only of Truth and Reckoning, our podcast. And it was with a Dr. John Aguiar from Virginia Beach area. And he was very concerned and spoke passionately about a project that was taking place there that was going to involve cutting down a beautiful forest, I guess, and there isn't much left forest-wise in the Virginia Beach area, but he was very concerned about the Diamondback Terrapins because this is their habitat. It's where they do their nesting each year. They come back to this area to nest, and that it was all going to be destroyed. So you can check that podcast out on our Truth and Reckoning site. But today it's a year later. Some people who have gotten involved in that project have taken some various actions, and will fill us in a year later what's happened there and what they're hoping they can accomplish moving forward. So I'm going to introduce Kim and Wendy, who are on the podcast with me. And then there's also Walt, who will be just joining by phone with sound. We don't have him on video. So I'm going to turn this over to you guys, let you introduce yourselves. Let our listeners know like your connection to Virginia Beach, this issue, and why you care so much.
Thank you, and thank you so much, Tish, for following up on this issue. It is it's been a great concern to the public. I am a native to Virginia Beach. This property has been very loved for its beauty and peacefulness, and the people who come there are just incredibly taken aback. They've no knowledge of what happens, and they come back to a property that they may get to visit, once a year, and they see what has been done and what has been taken from nature when they thought it was preserved, and they're just devastated. So I'm grateful for you giving the platform to Dr. Aguiar. He does an incredible job. He knows what he's talking about. And he had the guts to speak up for nature, just like Kim does and Walt does, and Julia.
Well, my name is Kim. I've lived in Virginia Beach on and off since I was 19 years old. I'm a native New Englander, and open space is very important to me. My family home abuts 50 acres of conservation land. I grew up around skiing and hunting and outdoor activities, skating on ponds. And Pleasure House Point was really a little slice of heaven to me and my family. I would go there often with my daughter, who liked to roam through the maritime forest, and the little piece of green space that we have has been destroyed. So I agree with Wendy's sentiment that community is really taken aback and upset by what's happened. It's not something you would ever expect to happen in conservation land, preserved land. I was there, the trees came down, and it's something I'll never forget. And again, I appreciate you very much, and CELDF and all who have spoken out on behalf of the forests and on behalf of our natural space in Virginia Beach.
I have lived in Virginia Beach since I was 5 years old. So all my life. What does the park mean to me? It's a natural public park area that we have fought for since the mid 2000s to keep it preserved for all the people to use. So it means a lot to us. And it meant, I think, a lot to the community, and we also thought it meant a lot to the local environmental groups. So that's why we decided to come out and protest and take actions against the current project.
Thanks, Walt. Can you guys fill the listeners in, because they don't know? So they left off with a year ago, right? The project was proposed, and it's not, I guess, a happy story. What's happened in the past year? So fill them in. They're not there; they can't see it. As best you can, describe what's happened.
I'll go. There was let's see, there were 56 acres of a rare coastal maritime forest, and 12 acres of that was removed to create a wetland mitigation bank. And by removed, that meant over 60,000 cubic yards of land, 5,214 trees. And so the natural habitat was just wiped out. So it's very confusing to people when they see it. So that is what's happened starting in March when the trees came down on March 17th. None of those trees were reused in any meaningful way. They are not, they're only replacing a little over 700 of them. They're putting some other plants, but basically the land was removed from both the public and nature. So that was 20% of the land that was taken away.
So this is just so people get it. And it's like, I know when I first heard it, it's kind of crazy. It seems like crazy talk, right? So the city was claiming that they needed to cut down over 5,000 trees. They're going to replace them with 600 because they needed credits, conservation credits, wetland credits. So can you kind of just give an overview so people listening understand what that means?
Yes, so federal laws require that if you are going to destroy or remove wetlands, that you have to replace them somewhere. So there are some flood protection projects in Virginia Beach that they are, and it's counterintuitive. They are destroying wetlands there, and in order to do that, they have to get wetlands somewhere else there, or create them. So what they did with this property is they said they're going to recreate what was there back in the 60s. And so all the growth that has taken place there in all these decades, they are pretending that that isn't valuable anymore, in order to destroy something somewhere else. And the beef we had is that there was a wetland bank that provides these credits it's already constructed, and it was available. It has to be in the same waterway and uh, um, or have the same qualities as the waterways that this is on the Lynnhaven River. And so it was approved for use in Virginia Beach, where they need to do this flood protection project. But they disregarded the existence of that, for creating something that now has to wait for a full year for the plants to grow before they can extract the credits, basically start the other project that they need to destroy wetlands.
Yeah.
Yeah, the city was
Kim, you have anything to add to this?
the city was hell-bent on pushing forward with this project, and I think Wendy did a great job sharing her expertise. But in February 2025, before the trees came down, there were multiple protests, multiple community events, gatherings. In March, a documentary filmmaker came out and captured residents pleading with our city government not to destroy our public land. Her name was Angelique Herring, and she did a great job. And it was mid-March when most of the trees came down, March 18th and 19th, when over 5,000 trees were clear cut, including live oaks that our city was not supposed to, which is all documented. There's several other things on the timeline. I don't know how far you want me to jump ahead, but I was on the property late April 27th. Our government had set up security cameras, urging people get off our public land or police will be called. And I can send you a video of that, Tish, if you'd like to include it or see it. It was really very surreal.
Please do.
We're on public
Yeah.
land, on our taxpayer paid for land, and there were cameras set up and a recorded message and messages: get off the land, you're trespassing on private property, which of course it was not private property. So that's what our local government did. The documentary filmmaker came back in May. There was also a recall petition at that time that was pretty heavily circulated for our city councilman who pushed the project in our own district, which all of us are residents. And then there was some illegal discharge. The press covered in August 2025, and then on October 12th, the media captured potential toxic waste, an oil barrel, and a porta potty floating around next to the wetlands. The November WHRO, we had a local reporter that did a fantastic job covering a federal lawsuit that was filed that Walt is the expert on. And then on my timeline that I was involved in, our city councilman was questioned recently on December 2nd at a meeting, and he did not want to talk about his developer donor and Pleasure House Point. So there's been a lot going on. I did not include the Army Corps of Engineer hearing. I was out of town at that time, but I believe Wendy and Walt were both there. And did you want me to unmute Walt so he can talk about the lawsuit?
Well, we'll get to that in a second. I mean, some of this is really interesting, I think, for people to understand how this system works, right? Like, so the people who live there are part of the community, don't want this. And I don't know which one of it was you. You guys sent me an article, but it was like an amazing quote where you guys said, one of you said the first day that they started cutting the trees down, that it sounded like a murder was going on with the birds, that I never heard such screaming as we heard that day. And, it's amazing again that this was home for not just, the terrapins, but all these other species that live there. And then the fact that they didn't use the trees for anything. Like you're telling me they just what did they do? Just take them to like be turned into like mulch or something? Or
If that, they went to a landfill for all we know. We had several attempts by local environmentalists to preserve some of the wood to make things for the community, but that was absolutely completely disregarded, dismissed. So we feel like if the city could have resold that wood for mulch or for wood pulp, but they didn't. It went to, they said that the contractor was in charge of disposing it. So we assume it's in a landfill.
Well, I heard that same article had a quote from one of your councilmen. It was Councilman Schulman, I think. And he said that they were taking down the trees to restore the area to its more natural condition, and I just kind of like, how do you take down 5,200 trees and then claim that that's actually taking it back to its natural? What was that area used for before the forest was there? Do you guys know?
So many moons ago, it was just, it was natural, and it started to be used for a sand spoil site, but not this parcel. Actually, the parcel that the Chesapeake Bay Foundation is on, which is a 10-acre adjacent parcel. It was all spoils for sand that was being dredged out of the Lynnhaven Inlet. And over time, the sand drifted. So some of the natural wetlands on the lowland part of this property that was adjacent to the water, the water used to flow in and out of there. So it started to be filled in with something that was unnatural, because that's what we did for the growth of this city. And then a developer started to fill it with rocks and other infill because they were trying to raise the land, stop the water from flowing in, and then they were going to develop condos on the property. So that all kind of went in the tank when the recession happened, and the city took advantage of that to purchase the property. They put part of it in a conservation easement. They reserved this part for wetland restoration, was the term that was used then. Somewhere in over time, and behind closed doors, that changed to wetland mitigation. So now the property was turned into something of value for the city to exchange. And therefore, and Mother Nature did an incredible job fixing what we had messed up in the past. And a beautiful forest had grown. People like Kim brought their children through there, Walt walking his dogs through there, just a beloved, heavenly, as I think Kim described, paradise for animals and people, and very respected property.
In the middle of a big
S-
urban area too, I think it's important to stress that. I mean,
Good
this
point.
was a very place of tranquility and peace for so many people, so many heartfelt accounts about what the forest and what the nature preserve means to people. We do have a state park, First Landing State Park, that's the most heavily visited park in the state. It's nice. It's also often very crowded. Have to pay admission to go there. This park was accessible, an easy drive right there, plenty of parking. Hop in there and enjoy the peace among the traffic and the noise and everything you would expect in a big city. So there's not a lot of pieces of land like that. It was green space. It was a park that was heavily used for the forest. I mean, we're surrounded by water everywhere here.
Mhm.
So just to put it into that context where this forest is located, this isn't Baxter State Park in Maine. This is a little an urban forest. There's not a lot of land of that kind in our city.
Mhm. I love the way you described it too, Wendy, that, Mother Nature did a great job of repairing, the area from what the humans did um, to it originally and, by the forest growing. And now we've done it again. I just am fascinated too, that part about the city putting up surveillance cameras and telling you guys you can't be on it's public land. The
I'll
only
text it
thing
to
I can
you. A picture's worth a that the video it
Oh,
speaks
I'd
for
love if you
itself.
guys can send pictures that we can post with this, it would be great.
Absolutely.
But they have to be pictures like you guys so that we can use and
A
repost. So we have
picture, not a
permission.
video.
Well, or even if the video's okay,
Yeah,
if you have
short
permission
video
to
clip.
share it. But yeah. But that idea, I mean, the closest thing here is when we had you know, local sheriff departments protecting pipeline um workers and against, but we're paying for the sheriffs, but they're representing the corporation, right, that's putting in that the people didn't want. Or when collecting signatures for petitions to put something on the ballot and they could do it on the sidewalk because it's public land, and the sheriffs came and told people they had to get off the sidewalk it's all this is crazy. Or in front of a library that we pay for. So I think that we have a much bigger issue here about a democracy issue of who's paying for this, what's public, what does that mean? Is there anything that's for the commons anymore, for the people, the community, right?
Yes, and part of what was fascinating was back when they first started talking about doing this restoration, when they used that term, they had involved the adjacent neighborhood, and they gave some information about um, how they were going to put in a kayak launch and bathrooms and a parking lot, and the neighborhood was like, no, we don't, no, we don't want that. This is supposed to be for nature preserved, and that and the impervious surfaces don't aren't suitable. Um, so that is part of the beef with the Army Corps that Walt's going to bring up later. Is that the city didn't get this information out to the community. So they changed it to a mitigation bank. They had one civic league meeting, one, and then they had one with a city committee. So that was less than 0.5% of the population of Virginia Beach for something that belongs to the citizens of Virginia Beach. And all this was brought up to the Army Corps, thus the lawsuit, because due process didn't happen. And an illegal taking of the public's land occurred. And there's no intent on replacing the 5,214 trees. Well, I guess it's about 4,500 after you subtract the 700 that the citizens now have to pay for to plant. So none of it logically makes sense to anybody, and that's, I think, a big frustration of ours is we expect the nonprofits to speak up. We donate to them, and in this case, they got behind the destruction in the name of water quality improvements that no one has ever been able to justify. There's no studies that say this destruction, this recreation and this exchange for credits is ever going to do anything to improve the water quality of the Lynnhaven River or the Chesapeake Bay.
Right. What do you think is behind the city? Do you I mean, I know this is all just surmising, right? You can't get in their head, but it's like, what do you think? Like, I mean, I've been to Virginia Beach. I know that it's very, built up with, you know, development of properties and that. Do you think that there's more properties they want to permit to be built? I mean, and that's obviously, we know that affects water quality too. And so is that what these credits are about? I don't know. Maybe you don't know.
Kim, you can take this one?
I can unmute Walt to talk a little bit more about it. I mean, I it's a fact that there's a developer who now who has land that she's ready to develop right next to Pleasure House Point, and there are now water views following the clear cut of the forest. And that was a question that I specifically asked of my city councilman, who took a campaign contribution from that company, and he didn't want to talk about it. That's another video that I can send along to you, a very defensive reaction to a question posed by a civic leader. So there's a lot of talk in the community about that. Julia cannot be on our call today, unfortunately. Julia Bell is wonderful. She was very involved in preserving Pleasure House Point initially, and she lives very close. I'm not sure if she's exactly in a butter, but she lives right next to the property. Something that was brought up during the WHRO news article. So do I believe that our government has our best interest in mind? Absolutely not. What exactly happened at Pleasure House Point? I think we need more media coverage to kind of dig into it and to get answers. I don't have those answers, but do I think this was altruism and something $12 million of our tax money to destroy our land in the name of water restoration and water quality? Hell no.
Not in the
Yeah,
least.
right. And unfortunately, that's what happens when when these kind of projects come to their communities. We think that there's all these groups and regulations and things in place that are going to protect it. And that's when we find out that it doesn't work the
And
way
I
we
think
thought
Dr.
it did.
Aguiar spoke to that in your previous podcast, some of the relationships between Chesapeake Bay Foundation, Lynnhaven River Now, and this project. And he gave some great insight. I think it's been eye-opening. My family used to donate modest amounts to those organizations and will not again. I mean, who would have thought when we were at the city council hearing that some of the strongest voices, rah rah, let's go city government, were these nonprofits, completely ignoring the wishes of citizens, completely ignoring what people wanted to happen to our public land, what their agenda was exactly, and their connections to any developers in our community. Those are questions that, I would welcome their response to, because it does not make sense to me on any level.
Well, and the fact that a year's gone by and nobody's they've been asked these questions directly and they're not giving answers. I mean, if they had answers, they would give them by now. I think one of the other big things that happened over this past year is the lawsuit that you guys keep referencing. So maybe we should bring Walt in, because he kind of led that effort, and let the listeners know, Walt, what this lawsuit is, what some of the claims are that you're bringing, and what you hope to accomplish with it.
Did you hear the question okay, Walt?
Dawn, so I think I did. She asked me what were the grounds for the claims in the lawsuit.
Yeah, what are the claims? Tell people, the listeners, because they obviously don't know what this lawsuit is. So fill them in.
Sure. So the principal motion for complaint is that the natural resource public park area was taken from us. That's the primary claim of what they call in the fancy legal language world, claim of injury. So the claim of injury against the plaintiffs is their loss of their natural public park, a section of the public park, the main interior section. Secondary to that are the claims that the Army Corps subsequently, on request of the city by way of their application for this project, Army Corps unlawfully permitted, or what's called verified, a nationwide 404 type permit to destroy resources that are protected, lawfully protected under the nationwide permits. And those resources specifically are all wildlife migratory bird breeding areas. Those they have to be by law avoided. There has to be some evidence of avoidance that was demanded by the Corps. And in this particular project, there was zero avoidance. There was no demand made on the applicant, the city, to avoid anything. And as we know, you've seen photos of the area. It's a dirt field now. So the secondary claim, as far as unlawful violation, was the dredging into active oyster reefs. That's also prohibited by law. And for those who want to go look it up, it's under the 404 nationwide permit number 27 and number 18. You can read the language there. The all-inclusive unlawful activity that was permitted, though, is referred to as what's called minimal adverse effects, so that avoidance must be demanded and employed by any applicant to ensure minimal adverse effects. And so even to the uneducated like we were just about a year ago, you could pretty much see from the project there was zero avoidance. And there was most definitely no consideration of minimal adverse effects. And the sad thing here is that we get into this language issue of I guess I'll call it semantics of what is a restoration. You know, that's how they floated this thing through. I call it a Trojan horse. They basically went in there to convert the land to clear it for development and title credits, and they called it a restoration. But the word restoration is defined under the 404 permit, the nationwide 27 permit, very clearly. Like, what is a restoration supposed to be? And then you can read it. You can read the language of the law under what's called 40 CFR 332 and 40 CFR, I'm doing this by memory, 40 CFR 230.98. Those give you the exact language for what a restoration has to be by law. And in this particular case, none of that was followed. So when I say none, that's not just me exaggerating. Zero compliance with lawful regulation was followed. And it's evident when you look at the area. So what do I mean by that? If they had demanded avoidance, they would have said, okay, you can have the permit, but you've got to leave 50% of the trees. You cannot destroy the 1.5 non-tidal wetlands there. You cannot dredge into oysters. You cannot destroy wildlife migratory bird habitat. So you're restricted to what kind of mitigation bank you are creating by law. In this case, they didn't follow any of that. So that's kind of the quickie regulatory framework that was supposed to be followed, and that is the reason why we filed the lawsuit, that was violated, and the regulators did not enforce the law.
And Walt, what was the Army Corps? Because that's who you're suing, right? The Army Corps.
Correct. So the primary defendant here is the Corps, but then we also have asked to add the city as a defendant because they're the ones.
And what's been the response from the Army Corps or the city to the lawsuit?
Standard response, as has been explained to me, is the first move in the game is to request a dismissal. So they've motioned to dismiss, and the last that we heard
based on motion to dismiss based on what?
No standing. Well, gosh, all these laws that are on the books are supposed to be there to protect their environment, right? I mean, that's the whole point of laws. Primarily under 404, protect clean water, and then protect trees and protect animals. You'd think the laws were designed in such a way that you could file a lawsuit to say, hey, you cut down 6,000 trees, you killed all the birds, and you dredged into oysters. That's not cool.
No.
But legally, the injury has to be sustained by the people, by the public, the plaintiffs.
Right. I was just making the reference.
And the birds have no rights. They can't hire lawyers.
Right. I was making the reference to our work with rights of nature, right? That's the whole point of what that kind of movement is about, is to recognize that nature actually does have inherent rights just like we do, right? Because we are nature, we are a species within that same ecosystem, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
but nobody has any standing to bring any lawsuits, but
Sad,
the city,
sad,
the developers, the Army Corps does. Yeah.
yeah. Sadly, we learned because we're all new to this, and we all got the what fire hose education on this one. And you know, I thank God, for people like Wendy and Kim and these other people that have just stood strong, because most people just give up. It's like, this is too complicated. They don't have the money, they don't have the time. It's just too hard. After you get past the protesting and the sign holding and the going in front of council, you're like, well, where do we go now? We're done. And I think the other sides figure out these people are not going to, they're not going to get much traction. There's nothing they can do. That's the saddest part about all this, is like, you end up facing this reality of there's nothing we can do. In fact, you get told that. We were told that across the board in contacting pro bono law firms and whatever. It's like, there's nothing you can do. You're against the wall. So
Right, because
here,
the laws are set up to allow this to happen, actually. That's the part people are realizing, I
it really
think.
seems like it, and you face the hard fact of this, that there is no real regulatory system and individuals that are enforcing the law. That's what you come down to, and that's seen across the country in a range of different issues. But in this specific area, environmental type issues, it just seems like it's a 0.001 chance of people actually being able to mount a defense and prevail. But, you know, we all talked about this and we decided it's worth it. It's worth getting out there and saying, no, you're not going to do this. And you're not going to, you think about doing this again in the future, you better think twice, because we will file. Will we prevail? I mean, it's unknown. A judge would have to determine and say, yeah, these people were actually, they were injured. They lost something. And then secondly, not only were they injured, but under the APA, this federal agency, Army Corps, made a decision that was unlawful. And it's what's called a non-discretionary decision. And you can get into these court cases of Chevron and local bright under Supreme Court and get into all this, issue of whether a judge can say that the agency, the Army Corps, made an unlawful decision. And it seems like that goes back and forth depending on who's looking at it. But the Supreme Court has said the judge has the jurisdiction to make that decision. And we hope they make it in favor. And what does that mean? If they do make it in favor, that permit would then be pulled, and the city would then be ordered to repair what they destroyed.
Yeah, and if I could just chime in regarding the lawsuit, speak to the reason why I personally joined on a very succinct and simple level. And again, I'm greatly appreciative of Walt. He's really been our go-to guy for filing this and doing hours and hours of work on behalf of the nature preserve, on behalf of citizens, on behalf of the trees and the nature that's been destroyed. But there's real concern about the city. If they were to do this, if they've already destroyed 10 plus acres, what's to prevent them from wiping out the rest of the park? So
Exactly.
my personal reason for joining is to bring attention to what has happened and hold those accountable, but also to prevent the rest of the roughly 100-acre preserve from being turned into a wetland mitigation bank or a wetland project or greenwashing, whatever you want to call it, an environmental disaster, as it's
Right.
been called by some residents. So that was my
And you guys are all plaintiffs, right, in the case? You're all
yes,
plaintiffs,
along
yeah.
with another
One
person not on this call, Julia.
Okay. One of the quick things too, and this is just, you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but it's like, I like look at other communities I work with everywhere, and, it's gotten to the point, like, we hear these stories over and over again, and they kind of all end the same. I mean, like you said, you don't know what the court's going to do, but a lot of times they don't rule in favor of the people or nature. And I'm wondering, like, say it did come to the city wanting to take out, let's say, another 15 acres there of the park, or 20 acres. Would you what do you think about people literally the community coming together and using other ways to stop the bulldozers from coming in, from stopping the, like, what is it going to come down to? And this is again just asking you, like, I question this all the time. Like, how do we actually stop the harm from happening? If the courts aren't going to stop it, the elected officials aren't going to stop it, the regulations aren't going to stop it. I mean, we're like in a place in the world, like I think of the world overall now, and all these communities everywhere, and everybody just goes, well, there's nothing we can do. And I just kind of like, I keep refusing to believe that. I mean, I really think there is. The fact is that we're all too, I guess, nervous to like actually stand up and protect our communities physically. And I'm not saying like violently. I mean, it can be like not, but like, and I myself too question this, but I see people in other parts of the world. What would it take to stop them from actually doing it? Actually bringing in the equipment and just chopping them all down.
Well, there's cases out in the Midwest, a few of them that I read, where people went extreme and they actually went out and camped out, set up colonies in the actual park here. I think there was Native American Indians. Their area was being violated, and they actually physically just camped out there, and it became a physical face-off. I think they
Right.
prevailed on some part of that, but eventually they were overruled. And just like you mentioned, that this stuff can go on for years, and it bounces back and forth between appeals. I don't know. I mean, it's apart from chaining yourself to a tree and there being like a physical confrontation, that's pretty insane. I don't know.
I guess that my question isn't that. I mean, I get that, but it's again, we give up our power, I guess, because to me, it's like this is to
Yeah.
me a power thing in a way. And it's like collectively,
Yeah.
one or two people doing it probably doesn't make any difference. But I guess I keep coming back to the community as a whole. If we really understood that collectively we do have, and you said that it's like, what did you just say? The word you just used, like to describe those people that actually stood up, that it's extreme. Like I think to myself, why is it extreme for the community members who love this park to stand up to protect it, but it's not considered extreme for the Army Corps of
And there
Engineer to
were
just come
people
in and just
standing in
cut them
front
all
of
down.
the
Next question.
bulldozers,
there
teachers
were.
and community members did
Mhm.
come out.
There sure were. Yeah.
And, I think
I'm praising what you guys are doing. I'm
I
just
think
saying
it
like
starts.
we need more resistance, and I think we all do it, and we all tend to give up our power too easily. Is I guess my
To say,
observation.
Tish, that what you're doing is you're helping us educate everyone on this issue, and we're hoping that somebody's going to listen to your piece here and maybe have a different angle that we could take. But I think what people forget, that they give up a lot of their power willingly every day when they turn their back to these issues,
Exactly.
or they turn on the TV
Exactly.
instead of reading about them and getting all the facts. They rely on somebody's summarization of them. So I think education, holding your elected officials accountable, I think that is our true power. And you're helping us get that information out. So thank you.
Yeah. And thank you guys, because it is true, because you're giving an example to people too in your story, because you're not the only ones, right? Like this is happening communities everywhere. I really appreciate all of you and what you're doing, and I appreciate these updates and that you're still fighting them. And don't let them take any more trees down from the rest of Pleasure House Point. We're going to post like maybe, I don't know if there's even a link that we can post to the lawsuit, Walt, or not. And I'm curious too, have you guys gotten any offers to help from other like environmental groups, other places, like not just the local one, but I'm like other like that care supposedly about water or forests or things. Has anyone reached out?
So in the beginning, we didn't really know what we were doing, and we wanted some help. We reached out to the Southern Environmental Law Group, I think it is. Those guys are involved in a lot nationally, and then we also reached out to a Maryland group that was a pro bono. I think their name was Chesapeake Alliance. They were interested in as far as that this was something that they dealt with on a larger scale. But at the time when we reached out, they didn't have the resources. They said they had too many projects that they were involved in. So, it's they were encouraging. They said, you should definitely do what you can to take a stand and address it. But we don't have the legal resources that we can provide to you. So we reached out to some people and got some guidance. And then really what all of us did is just we started reading and looking at things and deciding whether or not we wanted to come out of the gate and pursue it. And I mean,
Right.
I earlier you said, what can people do? At the end of the day, it's the rules are kind of set up the way they are. The system's set up the way it is, and sadly, this stuff ends up in protracted legal back and forth can go for years. I am encouraged by a couple of the cases that I read online. It's very few, but in some of these cases, people do prevail. The largest reason why they don't prevail in something like this appears to have to do with what's called a moot issue, meaning it's a sad project was approved, people went in and destroyed, and the courts say, well, there's nothing we can do about it now. It's yeah, they violated the law, but it's over with. In our particular
Yep.
case, it's a mud field out there. There's no moot case killing aspect of this. It's you can plant trees now. You can restore the park 6 months from now or a year from now. It doesn't matter. We can wait as long as we need to. The other good thing for us is we're not subject to what some other plaintiffs are, which is attrition by you don't have enough money or legal help. So we don't have that as a something that would have to eventually give up. So the time is on our side, but it's hard. I think that to answer real quick, I think people they become disappointed and they don't have the knowledge. It's hard, and you give up. You just give up and say, oh well, we did our best. Um, the four of us are not like that. We don't give up. And our city knows that, and the council representative for the area definitely knows where we're at with him on this and what they did. And I don't know if it was mentioned earlier, but I'm just going to say it if this is going to be on air, is that land area wasn't cleared for a mitigation bank of wetland credits. It was cleared for land development right behind it. That's why it was cleared. It had nothing to do, and that's what really made us angry, is that you guys destroyed our park so somebody could build behind it to have a water view and they could bring water closer to them. And that is an utter violation of federal law. That's what lit us off, that lit me off. So I just want to make sure I said that.
Yeah, we got
That's
that. Yeah.
been
And
discussed
it's also,
openly. Excuse me, Tish. I'm sorry.
oh, go ahead, Kim. Sorry, go ahead. What?
That's being discussed very openly. Thanks very much again to CELDF for your piece, but also to WHRO's Catherine Hafner, who did a piece on our
Yep.
federal lawsuit. It was heavily, got a lot of traction on social media, and it's totally a nonpartisan issue. We have citizens of all walks of life, all ages, all political backgrounds coming together and calling out this water view. And there have been citizens calling for the taxpayers of Virginia Beach to be repaid for what's happened. So there's a lot of buzz about this topic, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, you're part of the same place-based community, no matter. You can get over your other differences, but you all share that place-based community. Well, I want to thank you guys a whole bunch for keeping up and fighting. And I have a feeling that the city won't be able to cut down any more trees in that area or in that park, hopefully, because of you guys. So that's a good thing. And is there anything that final thoughts you want to leave listeners with, or you'd like any action you want people to take?
Well, I'd like to say that the other part of the property is very much in jeopardy. The other part of the property, which is a remaining 46 acres of land, and that includes some water,
Right.
that it's owned by the city. it is in a conservation easement, but it could very easily be that they decide that they need to use that for another public project. So I would love it if people would be involved, if they would go to pleasureHousePoint.org and follow that for more information. If they would contact Walt to help support him in our legal costs, because that is ultimately what Kim was saying. That's the bare minimum we want to do, is protect the other part of the property that is in jeopardy.
We're back here getting an update from John Aguiar in Virginia Beach. Some of you may remember a podcast we did a while back. It was one of our first ones, actually. I think maybe first or second one.
Second one.
Yeah, where John was trying to, he reached out telling the story of trying to protect this, beautiful forested area close to Virginia Beach because it's a habitat for the Diamondback Terrapin, as well as many other species of birds and animals in that area. And so we did have a conversation. What I do want, I know there's been some destruction there. Several acres of the forest have been cut down. But this update, we also did a conversation with other people in Virginia Beach who've really gotten quite active. And one of them even commented to me and thanked me and you for having that first conversation, because that's how they found out about this. So as bad as it may seem, Jen, I just want to let you know that, by you speaking out, it did inform other people in the community, which is what we'd hoped, and that they've also been taking some actions. And we do have updates, a conversation with them that we're going to link your updates into. So just so the audience and that, that's part of the reason for this conversation. And I do want to give a shout out to you for coming forward last year.
Well, I appreciated it. It certainly feels like I'm, standing on the mountains of the night side of Pluto, sort of talking into the great cosmic abyss.
I think a lot of activists would agree with that statement, whatever their issue is, whether it's environmental or other issues. I think that's a lot of times how we all feel. And we don't always see the results of us speaking out and in the moment. Sometimes it takes time. And so I do, again, want to applaud you for your courage and bravery to step up and speak, because it does sometimes get very disheartening. I wanted to start with, if you could just give me and the audience just your perspective of some of the updates since the last time we talked. Back then, the forest was intact, and you were trying to get more people in the community to be aware. I know the other group we have talked to that obviously got very active because of you bringing this to everyone's attention. I think one of the things, they've filed a pro se lawsuit. I know there's been some issues. I don't know if you've been dealing with that, trying to get the city and local electeds, what your experience with that's been since then.
My experience with local elected officials has not been positive or encouraging at all. As we discussed in our last conversation, the city is quite skilled at presenting a very greenwashed approach to their actions. What startled us all was how very quickly this project went from a years-long dormancy to something that was just steamrolling along without hardly any notice. And as we discussed last time, there was just, one rather feeble public meeting just a few days before Christmas, mid-afternoon, when everyone's doing things. And then just a few days after that New Year, they voted it through, despite the significant opposition of everyone who was able to come out and speak. So it was really a zero to light speed operation on their part, which to me at least suggests that this was really kind of their plan all along. Because this area, Pleasure House Point, which was designated with much fanfare as a city natural area around 2012, had always been quite neglected by City Parks and Recreation. There was never anyone who seemed dedicated to that natural area. Not long before this situation came up, a birdwatching friend and I were discussing trying to get a birdwatching group involved with many of the ordinary park issues, vandalism, illegal use, and that sort of thing. And it was just very, very difficult. I tried reaching out to the director of Parks and Recreation the then director, and that was like pulling teeth from a basilisk. And so it seems to me in retrospect that the city was probably not interested in devoting any effort to this when they more than likely had this in mind all along.
Well, yeah, that makes sense, doesn't it? Like, so you're not going to care that much about upkeeping an area that you know you're going to destroy. What I found really surprising talking to the other folks there in Virginia Beach who've been active too is that they told me that they've been sent some photos and a small video that they've put up cameras and a system like a surveillance
Yes.
system.
Yes. The city has put out these freestanding security cameras, supposedly against whatever villainous criminal element that dares speak up for trees and terrapins, apparently. And I've seen these cameras up close. I'm sure I'm in the city's facial recognition system now. Interesting you mentioned cameras because there's another sort of camera that appeared that I don't know if your other guests have mentioned. The last time I was out there, there was a trail camera that was in a one of the remaining thickets of woods on one side of the vast deforested construction project, and so that trail camera was aimed at some sort of burrow. And
Hmm.
the burrow was much too large to have been a terrapin burrow. I'm not sure what other sort of creature it could have been, but it seems like there is at least one camera making some sort of sampling effort. Given, and I can talk about my issues with Freedom of Information Act requests, but given the massive stonewalling the city has done in terms of FOIA requests, trying to find out about that one camera is just, I don't expect the city to be forthcoming about that.
Yeah.
Given their extreme reluctance to provide any meaningful information, at least to me as a citizen, on previous FOIA requests.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like, so in other words, you just did a foot asking what that camera was for and what it was recording, and they won't respond even to
I
that.
haven't asked about that camera yet.
Mm.
Based on other FOIA experiences with the city going back years, in which they have stonewalled, deflected, ignored. There's an issue that's been going on for a couple of years now where on a separate incident in another city park in which I had originally made what should have been a very simple, broad FOIA request for all documents relating to this incident on this date in this park. And that should have included body cam. The city's FOIA personnel manufactured out of thin air, they simply fabricated a very convenient exception, which they claimed I had made, which I did not make, and which I was able to demonstrate from emails that I never made. But by the time I got that sorted out with them over weeks and weeks, the relevant body cam had just magically disappeared. And that body cam video would have made a tremendous amount of difference because the individual wearing the body cam was very clearly taking the side of someone who's breaking the law in a city park. And that body cam video magically disappeared. The city's response in that situation was very much what you could call flood the zone, where just about every sentence in their response was either an outright lie or a distortion or a lie of omission. And so that is just how the city treats FOIA requests, at least where I'm concerned.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because just for the audience who doesn't know what FOIA means, it's Freedom of Information Act. And so those are requests. We as citizens are supposed to be able to request information and documents from our government, since it's our government, and they're supposed to provide those. And I think, what you're describing is something that, we've seen I've experienced it myself, all the communities we've worked in, it's the same. And it's kind of like that idea that they have this, that we're supposed to be able to have this tool, and yet they're the ones who have to provide the information on themselves. So this is what we find, or although, a lot of times they'll redact it, right? You'll get some
Right.
forms that will be completely blacked out, or like what you're saying, they change the information, or they just deny them outright and say, your request is too broad or too vague or
Right.
yeah, and
Yes,
detail.
I've had other experiences um, with the state agency I mentioned before, Department of Conservation and Recreation, um, in which I asked made a fairly simple FOIA request, and they came back with a kind of ludicrous exemption. There is a nonprofit in Virginia called the Virginia Center for Open Government. they're dedicated to helping ordinary citizens understand the FOIA process. And so a representative of VCOG told me in relation to my FOIA request to the city of Virginia Beach that it was a really unusual degree of reluctance to comply on the city's part with what should have been simple requests on my part. And if I could just go into a little more detail about my FOIA request involving Pleasure House Point, because I think that sort of illuminates the city's approach to this sort of thing. There had been, the city had put up this so-called information page about Pleasure House Point using the city's media resources. This is a page on the city's website claiming to, quote, dispel myths, unquote, about this project. And one of the statements was a line to the effect that nothing on Pleasure House Point was actually natural vegetation or something like that. And it was just scientifically nonsensical. It was completely inaccurate. It was just not true. And so I started with my city library. The Library of Virginia Beach is very good about doing research questions on behalf of citizens. Unfortunately, they kind of ran into a stone wall. So I followed up with the city's communications director, sort of the lead media person. And I just wanted to ask who it was, which individual wrote that particular line on the city's information page. So initially, the communications director responded with this deflection, claiming it was just, quote, subject matter experts, without giving any names, without giving any demonstration of background or particular expertise. But when I tried following up, asking more questions, she just didn't respond. I tried following up again. Again, she said it was city staff who were subject matter experts, unquote, never giving anything more. I tried following up again. She just didn't respond. She just ignored me.
Yeah.
So I followed up with city council. One or two of the city council members sent my request to the city manager, who then put it into the FOIA system. When that finally worked its way through, they didn't give me most of what I asked. I still don't know exactly who wrote that particular line, which again was just scientifically untrue. But what I was able to take from the information they did give me is that the people who put together that page purporting to give facts about the ecological background on this project, none of them had any background in science or ecology. They were city engineers. They were the city media department, individuals who clearly had no understanding of coastal marine ecosystems or ecology in general, much less conservation. Essentially, what the city was doing, they had civil engineers and city media employees making these scientifically false claims on the city's website to influence public opinion on this project.
Right. Yeah, that's really deceptive because we as the public, right, we're like such a expert focused culture, right? Like we believe people are experts and that we're using expert scientific data or research to put these things forward. So as a person in the public, just a resident, if they go to the city site and they read something like that, they're going to think, of course, I mean, that's what we
Exactly.
just believe, right? And so the fact that the facts weren't true or even put out there by someone with credentials who knows anything about the habitat or whatever, or conservation, like you said, that's deceptive and wrong.
Yeah, and just to follow up on one other aspect of that, during the process of my contacting each city council member on this issue and also on other recent issues, I asked each city council member, sometimes 2 or 3 times a piece, to affirm in writing their support for FOIA, for the city's Freedom of Information Act, and for the idea of maximum transparency of local government to its citizens. I asked each one of them to affirm their support for that. Not a single one of them did that. Not a single one.
Well, that's very telling as well, right? And I think it's
It is.
great that the public will, at least in your community, and I think other people in other communities will also, this might wake them up because it really doesn't operate all that much differently no matter where we live in this country, which community,
Yeah.
unfortunately. I have a question related to because for the people who, maybe aren't aware and aren't there and maybe haven't the other group provided a lot of photos, which is kind of nice. That now, again, if you could remind me how many acres the city did take down of the forest and what you've noticed if you've been back there, I'm sure you have,
Yeah.
as far as how it's impacted wildlife and, the other species there.
So, I think the total acreage taken down was 8 acres. I'm not entirely sure, embarrassing as it is to say.
A lot. It was a lot of trees.
It was, well, the semi-official count was 5,200 trees. It's probably closer to 6,000 trees.
Mhm.
Um, and that, as far as the wildlife and the tree loss, that does touch on some other issues. The organization, which I had mentioned before, the Turtle Logo organization, which
Mhm.
is Lynnhaven River Now, they have been promoting the supposed benefits of this all year after having taken credit for helping protect it for many years. One of the things they have done just recently, it might have been just yesterday, they sent out an email sort of touting all the different bird species one can see in this area now, talking about egrets and herons and so forth. What they and that's just spin on their part because what they haven't done is provided a real in-depth comparison of numbers and distribution on the property of these different species for this year compared to previous years. And I think that would be quite telling. It's not really a surprise that if you have this kind of open tidal mud pit that's been gouged out with bulldozers, you would get herons, and egrets sort of scavenging what they could. But again, this used to be very dense pine forest, which offered a great deal of habitat for many other species, bird species, terrestrial species.
Well, yeah, that it's so funny the way you word that, like, the way because we can see them now, because we cleared all the trees, we could see that, like, they might have been there before, but you had a hard time seeing them because of the trees. It's just
There is a
ridiculous.
certain irony to that indeed.
Mhm.
And if I could just comment a bit more about the trees and sort of the community's discussion, for want of a better term, that's gone on since then. Unfortunately, most people in Virginia Beach are not too concerned about this. There has been some discussion on Reddit, which is not necessarily the best place for balanced, informed discussion. Um, but going back to what you said earlier about ordinary people sort of taking the city's word for things, there have certainly been individuals in Reddit threads who are extremely motivated supporters of the city's position. And there's one account in particular that I don't want to say this is a paid individual, but clearly has some ideological motive, some connection probably to the individuals involved. Because we've seen the city council member, Joe Schulman, in whose district this is, he has been extremely proactive in different Facebook groups, including a Facebook group that was established to share news about this situation. He just sort of inserted himself into the discussion and very conveniently this anonymous account will post a leading question about the project, and then he'll come in and answer under his own name, thanks for asking. And it's just very transparent. But in the Reddit discussions, one of the claims that is made is that that pine forest, which was part of the habitat, was cleared. People are talking as if it was only the pine forest that was cleared. This patch of pine forest. It was actually a whole mosaic of habitats. There were open portions, is sort of like an open woodland. There were other portions that were densely shrubby, and so that kind of mosaic really is more structure in an ecological sense, more habitat structure, a more habitat variety, more microclimates, and so that increases diversity. And there were these claims that the pines were, unnaturally dense, and that it was a forest that shouldn't have been there because it grew up on dredge spoils. And it's true that some of that area was covered in dredge spoils from decades past, but these are relatively innocent sediments and sand. And the pine forest that grew up was the first stage in what in ecology is sometimes called old field succession. And so, there were patches that were extremely dense. Um, and so not all of those trees would have survived to maturity. but you would have some individual pines that would outcompete others. But this is part of the natural process of succession. When you have mature forest, a large tree falls, you have what's called a light gap, and seedlings will grow up and compete vigorously until that light gap is filled. And in this situation, when you have old field succession, the pines will compete among themselves. And what a lot of people seem to be missing is first that this is a long-term process. Once you have a mature pine forest, that in turn creates the microclimatic conditions in the forest floor for hardwood seedlings to begin to grow, and they will eventually mature and replace the pines. And this is kind of a very simplistic, model, which would eventually result, in theory, in a hardwood forest. And so, in this situation, you can imagine that live oaks would eventually grow up and convert this to, either a mixed hardwood softwood or maybe a full live oak forest. And that would be what we call a maritime forest, which is a rare habitat and which we could certainly use more of. And so there's the time dimension involved. And this is a process that takes decades and decades, during which, as the seedlings develop, you have a richer understory layer, richer herb layer. And so eventually you have many more species, again, many more niches ecologically. And so you end up with a much more ecologically diverse habitat. So that in itself, people are just looking at, the momentary snapshot of a pine forest with, densely packed seedlings or saplings, and they think, well, that's not natural, that can't last. And in a sense, ecologically, no, it can't last. It'll develop into this, mature, rich hardwood forest. So that's one aspect. The other aspect that people aren't really thinking of, I guess, is that yes, these are dredge spoils. Yes, this is sand and sediment. But as these pine saplings grow, mature, and outcompete, the ones that are outcompeted will die, they'll fall. And nursery logs are tremendously important in themselves. And I've seen this, in the tropics in Costa Rica and Brazil. I've seen this in temperate, North American forests, where as this log is slowly decaying into the forest floor, many other species will begin to root in that decaying log even before it melts down into the forest floor. And so fallen logs becoming nursery logs is an important part of the ecosystem as a whole. And once those logs eventually decay into the soil, then you have this process of continually enriching the soil. And so what originally started out as just sand and sediment ends up becoming very rich, fertile soil. And that, again, it's the absolute magic of photosynthesis, where the trees are literally building themselves out of water and air and sunlight and drawing in carbon for structure. And then, of course, the species, in particular bird species, that will come in, they will bring nutrients. And so all of that enriches the soil. And
That's
so again,
so interesting, John, because you're right. So many people don't understand that. And there's so many examples of that we don't understand.
right.
Nature, we just come in and look at it as a resource, what we can get from it. And then even from that aspect, like people saying, oh, this is too dense. These pines, these little pines aren't going to survive. And it's like, well, yeah, don't
Yeah,
mess with it. That's the point. And it's like, but
exactly.
again, because we don't understand and we want everything immediate and we don't want to think about it's going to take, decades or a generation or two or three, right? Like we're so impatient.
Indeed.
Yeah. That was a really good explanation, I think, especially for people who don't understand.
Well,
So thank you.
yeah. And I think part of, again, this goes back to the city's lack of attention to and investment in this natural area when they first established it, a dozen or so years ago in 2012. To the best of my knowledge, the city never really put much effort into discussing this sort of thing in terms of environmental education. Now, I mentioned last time there is a showpiece structure on part of the property called the Brock Center, BROCK Center,
Right.
which is sort of a cohabitation situation between the Chesapeake Bay Foundation and Lynnhaven River now, or at least they used to be there. That was a bit tense between them. And so there is some signage. What there is, is more focused on the aquatic aspect, which is fine. But when I participated in one of the small scale plant rescues, when people were trying to save what they could before the trees were clear cut, and there were several city employees there, and I was really astonished at their lack of basic understanding, in some cases, of the species present and certainly of processes like this. And I should also mention, just because this is part of the dynamics of the optics with Lynnhaven River now, they have, I don't know if they're actively claiming credit for the plant rescue, but people in the community are giving them credit for the plant rescue. And they did apparently take some seedlings and plant them in another location. But I think it's really important to point out that the initial plant rescues, which started up about a year ago, were not driven by Lynnhaven River now. There was another even smaller group called Friends of Live Oaks, which is active mostly in Northern Virginia Beach, FOLO. And it was the leader of FOLO, a gentleman named Clay Burnick, who was the one who, as soon as he heard about this situation with the impending clear cutting of this area, he engaged with the city and apparently put a lot of effort into pushing the city into, quote unquote, allowing these plant rescues. Even though this is a city property, he still had to move a little heaven and earth simply to allow the plant rescues to go forward. There were some city employees there very grudgingly. The city was not at all motivated to do this, but I believe it was because of Clay Burnick's vigorous, one might say, untiring efforts that these plant rescues were able to happen at all. Lynnhaven River now sort of insinuated themselves into the process. And again, there was that quite ludicrous moment when, we were about to head off into the woods in, late January, early February, and we have a Lynnhaven River Now employee telling us to be on the lookout for terrapins just in case, which was as far as they went towards protecting the terrapins. What is just tragic is that, during the very aggressive bulldozing phase, when you have these heavy machines gouging up the earth, there's chain link fence around these many acres. It's just bare gouged earth and piles of roots. There are these little signs on the outside of the chain link fence with pictures of Diamondback Terrapins saying, "Watch out for Diamondback Terrapins." As if some individual in, a bobcat or an earth grader
It's going to pay
is going to
attention.
even see a Diamondback Terrapin, much less do anything about it. I understand the individuals who are operating those machines, they're doing their job, and I don't want to cast any aspersions on them personally because, at best, they're kind of caught between. But it was just a ludicrous, meaningless gesture for the city to put up those
So can
signs.
I ask, this is a question about the terrapins because I don't know, and
Mhm,
I'm totally
mhm.
ignorant of this. So when did they come to like in the end of January, February? Is that when they come to nest in that
No,
location?
no, it would
That's
be nesting much later in the year, sort of May, June-ish.
okay.
And so, yeah, during this time of year right now, and during the time of the plant rescue about a year ago,
Mhm.
ideally the terrapins would be buried in the mud somewhere in the water, just sort of waiting out the winter.
And then they come, so when you're saying like in the spring, then they would come to this area to
Late
nest.
spring, early summer. Yeah.
Right. So they're still probably going to come then, right? But they're going to
I
come back and find this totally destroyed area.
yeah, I don't know what their options are. I mean, this
Mhm.
past year, because there's been so much construction, and not just the heavy machines themselves, but the machinery wasn't just grading out, the remnants of where the forest was to make it level. It was actually digging down in accordance with their design to allow water into that area. So that was a great deal of earth that was gouged out. And so supposedly the city carted it off to some other location. But I have to imagine there'd be a tremendous amount of runoff, tremendous amount of turbidity in the water. And so I can't imagine that would have made things any more hospitable for the terrapins. I think someone at one point had posted about finding a dead terrapin. Um, I don't know, and more importantly, I don't know if Chesapeake Bay Foundation or Lynnhaven River Now or the city or anyone else has been doing any sort of systematic study of the impact of all of this on the terrapins, which one would think they would certainly do.
Yeah, that's what I keep wondering, like, because they're usually just programmed, to come back to that same spot, and I'm
Right,
like,
right.
so are they gonna come in the spring, and this is what they're gonna find, just they're
There may be other tiny little patches of sandy beach where they could come ashore. The question is that enough? Those would be the same areas that would be more intensively impacted by walkers, by dogs, by all the human impacts on this very heavily visited site. So I can't imagine nesting would be as successful. I can't imagine hatchling recruitment would be as successful. And again, one would think there would be someone who should have been studying this, but I haven't heard if they are. And again, Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, who supposedly would be involved with this. I'm not aware that they are. This time last year, I tried reaching out to a DCR employee who supposedly was a strong proponent of terrapins and their protection and education about them. She never responded to me.
well, it'll be
As
interesting then to if we follow up in the spring, I'm sure you guys and the other community members there who are concerned about the terrapins will be looking, I would assume, come spring to watch and see what happens, even if the city or the state is.
one would think, one would
Yeah.
think. But
Yeah.
again, once again, this points back to the lack of systematic attention to this species and other species at Pleasure House Point since it was established. Ideally, if this was, as Lynnhaven River Now claimed, the last nesting site for the terrapins in the Lynnhaven River, one would think there would have been some studies of nest placement and recruitment over the past many years, because this would be an ideal spot for it and it would be necessary to really back up their statements. And I
Yeah.
just don't know if that's taken place in any systematic way.
I guess I probably need to wind this up now, but one of my questions, final questions, is obviously that is there plans that you know of that the city plans to cut even more of the forest down than what they have,
Well,
or
that's an interesting question. As your other guests probably mentioned, there is an adjacent set of woods, which has always been private property, which was to the immediate north of the trail that ran across the northern edge of Pleasure House Point. Ever since this natural area was established, that's been kind of a lurking concern about that privately held strip of woods. There are already plans we've seen to cut it all down, replace it with housing. There was one lot that very quickly was cut over and seemed kind of primed for construction, and that seems to have been paused for some reason. I'm not sure why, but yeah, much of the vegetation adjacent to this area is scheduled for destruction and construction. As far as further cutting within Pleasure House Point, I don't know of anything, but I would not be surprised in the least. I mean, you used a phrase during our last conversation. I think it was managed destruction, and that seems to be what's going on. Because very very conveniently, as your other guests may have pointed out, this private land that's about to be developed magically now has waterfront views because of this project. The company that holds that land, they are generationally patient with their land holdings, and they will wait for an opportunity like this. And it really feels like city council, who received donations from them, by the way, went out of their way to make this opportunity for them.
well, like anything, there's some really sad things here, but also some hopeful things because I think you did get the ball rolling, so to speak, on getting other people in the community aware. I think council definitely knows that people are not in favor of this, and we'll see how resilient the terrapins are and some of the other animals and species, the birds in this habitat, what they do come spring, and hopefully, I don't know what's gonna happen. You'll have to keep us updated. But
Right.
I think just the fact that you guys have done a great job of bringing this to the attention of more people in their communities, I think can relate to some of the experiences you've had and hopefully can, stand on your shoulders, so to speak. I mean, that's what we kind of try to do with this is give
I'm
more
not sure if
people.
my shoulders are standable.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, they are.
If I
Um,
could, if I
to
could,
give people the courage, right, to speak up and for nature more in more places. So
well,
that's
I
positive.
appreciate that. If I could just make a couple final comments, because I mentioned it last time, and this still remains an absence. There's a need for two things in particular. The first, what we really need still is an actual environmental journalist to dig very deeply into the entire history of this situation and how it came about and how it went from dormant to light speed in days. Because as my FOIA experiences show, there's still a great deal that is veiled behind the city's attempts to deflect and stonewall. And second, what Virginia Beach as a whole desperately needs is a local NGO that is dedicated to protecting the remaining pockets of terrestrial ecosystems in Virginia Beach, because we have several organizations who at least purport to protect what little remains of coastal marine ecosystems. But there are also still pockets, valuable pockets of forest and other terrestrial ecosystems. And as this shows, we really need an NGO that can speak up in an organized, professional manner for these remaining patches of terrestrial ecosystems in the city.
So the call is put out there. Thank you, John. And, hopefully maybe some journalist will hear this or
I can
NGO and
only hope.
actually want to step up and take
Yeah, I
the lead.
and thank you again tremendously for being the one organization who has listened to this and who's cared about this and who has been willing to talk to us about this and keep
Yeah.
attention on this issue.
Well, thank you. And we'll see. We keep moving forward, pushing forward. The other group, I know they have a pro se lawsuit they did that still is in court and
Uh-huh.
things like that. So people, that's all putting pressure on. That's all resistance, examples of resistance, you doing the FOIA requests. I know people tend to think of resistance as people taking physical action a lot of times, but this is all forms of resistance. So the documentary that was made, they mentioned a short one, going to public officials, exposing what's happening so more people know about it, educating people, and this spreads far and wide to other communities. So thank you again, and we'll keep following this story.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
All right, thanks, John.
I want to thank you for listening to our show and let you know a few ways you can support Truth and Reckoning. First, share this broadcast with your friends and family. Leave a positive review via your podcast app. Visit the Truth and Reckoning YouTube channel and leave a thumbs up and a comment. The full scope of the work of CELDF, including this show, comes with a financial cost. So if you're able to make a donation, go to CELDF.org. That's CELDF.org. But most importantly, our goal for this show is to empower you to take action. So the best way you can show your support is to get involved with your community and protecting the place where you live. Thank you very much.